Next, our documentarian, Ken Sneeden, is going to take you through some of the 6 women who were very instrumental in our islands, both from being pioneers all the way up to the current day. So, first of all, I thank the folks like yourselves who come out to our events. And I always ask this question: how many folks are at a historical society event for the first time? Okay, that's good. We always like that, but we also thank those who are our regular fans. And we always thank our donors, because we do not have a membership per se, and it's our donors who allow us to do what we do. We thank, in that same vein, the Sanibel Captiva Trust Company. They are our presenting sponsor and have been for the last few years. And it's their support that gives us the funding to do those events that are so important to Captiva history. And we always thank the CCA and Emily Ankerson for what the CCA gives us in terms of this beautiful hall. We kind of think of this as our home field, okay? So when we're not doing an away game, this is where we like to do our presentations. And the CCA just not only has a beautiful place, but they help us so much. The people I am most indebted to are our hardworking board and our events committee. And if I could ask them to stand up. I know they're extremely humble and they avoid doing this, but please. Thank you. You are folks that make it happen for us. Ken Sneeden, who is the documentarian for the Captiva Island Historical Society. Ken has produced many of our programs, but most specifically, the last 6 of our full-length documentaries, or acclaimed documentaries, as we think of them. So, Ken?
Thank you so much. So you've got 6 women on the screen here, and left to right, Hattie Brainerd Gore, Alice O'Brien, Sippy Whiteman. Down on the lower left is Anne-Marie Lindbergh, Maybelle Stamper, and Stella Farwell, whom we're going to tell you a little bit more about Stella and the very important role that she played in the formation of the Captiva Island Historical Society. So I wanted to let you know that I'm referencing 4 main books here tonight. True Tales of Old Captiva, Voices from the Past. They will be on sale tonight from the library board for $5 a piece. They used to be 15 or 20, so it's a real bargain. We've got a new book added to our collection that, frankly, we just found out about recently, called Alice in France, the World War I Letters of Alice and M. O'Brien. We're going to tell you more about that later. But Alice O'Brien is one of the people that we've been trying to find more information for years now. And we just hit the jackpot, and I'm going to tell you about that in a moment. And then just I got some other reference notes from Jerry Magg's book. Jerry's a local historian, Remarkable Women of Sanibel and Captiva. And we're going to have we're going to run some excerpts tonight from Gift from the Sea because of Anne-Marie Lindbergh, Charles Lindbergh's wife, who was a pretty frequent visitor to Captiva in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and we'll get into that. Now, I wanted to kind of tell you how we came to this point in what we're going to present tonight. You know, as Tom mentioned, we've been doing documentaries now, or they've been doing documentaries for 10 years. I came in 6 years ago and started working with them. And over the past year and a half, after we finished one of our really major and popular documentaries on the Jensen family, about Jensen's Twin Palms Marina, we said, you know, not every subject deserves a half-hour, 45-minute, or hour-long documentary, but there are many, many important topics that we do want to cover and we want to share with people, like we've been doing for the past 10 or 15 years. And but maybe we'll do them in 5 or 10-minute segments instead of documentaries, and we'll make them available for presentations like what we're having tonight, and we'll put them on the website, and it'll be smaller chunks, no less important, but again, you don't need the full-blown treatment. And we've been saying we need to find out more about these people, okay? And so we've been investigating these people, and you're going to see a little bit of that research tonight. But frankly, this is the one tonight that we're going to talk about more prominently because we have just, literally in the last couple of weeks, received some unbelievably exciting information and photography about Alice O'Brien. But I'm going to tell you more about that later. But first, we want to kind of go back to the beginning. 1896, when this lady, Hattie Brainerd Gore, and she was Hattie Brainerd when she came here with her husband, and she later married Alvin Gore. I'm going to tell you all about that. She was truly a pioneer woman. I mean, she came here when literally Captiva in the late 1800s, it was just an isolated rural outpost of scrub lands, farming lands. The few people that were here were farmers. And she and her husband, Herbert, came down in 1896. They were from Canada. They were dairy farmers, and they came down, and for some reason, they landed on Buck Key. And for the life of me, I even, and Captiva, frankly, these are modern maps, obviously, so you see Captiva there, but Buck Key still looks that way. It's total preserve because of what Lisa said earlier, the effort they made several years ago to preserve that island. There's no development on that island at all. And, but they came down, and they were on Buck Key. They brought 2 children with them, Gordon and Ann, and they were citrus farmers. They started a citrus farm there. In fact, approximately in that location where you see the photo of Hattie right now. Now, unfortunately, again, given the times, it's not too unusual, but they faced a lot of tragedies in their lives here. But again, as you'll see as we continue this story, they kind of overcame those tragedies. And were able to develop a long and successful life span here on Captiva Island. Well, the first tragedy occurred with their daughter Anne. She was 4 years old when she came, and she lived a little while longer. And she and her mom used to row that route. It might not be that exact route, but they would come over from Buck Key and they would come onto Captiva. And both of them, from what we can tell from historical records, they loved going out and sitting on the beach and watching the sunset. I mean, who wouldn't, right? But I mean, again, this is early 1900s, okay? So that was one thing that they really liked to do. And Anne, again, at the time this happened, she was about 8, 9, 10 years old. She found a spot on the beach, on Captiva, that she really loved. And guess where that was? Right where we're sitting here tonight. Right out here in the Gulf of Mexico was the spot that she and her mom would come to and watch the sunsets. And she just fell in love with this place. I mean, she was like, and again, consider the times. And she was only 8, 9 years old. Well, before they left Canada, her grandparents had given her a gold coin. Her and her brother both got a gold coin from their grandparents. Well, she loved this spot so much. There was one guy, William Binder, who was the original homesteader on Captiva, who owned all that property that you see there, kind of around that yellow circle, or most of it. There were a few other homesteaders here as well. But William Binder owned most of that property. And Anne asked her parents, can I trade my gold coin if Mr. Binder will sell me the piece of property that I love so much? I love going to the beach. And Mr. Binder agreed. William Binder agreed and said yes. So he sold her the land. So she owned that piece of property. This 9-year-old girl or 10-year-old girl owned that piece of property. Well, unfortunately, it was not long after she purchased the property that Anne stepped on a nail somewhere when she was walking on the beach here, got tetanus, and died at 10 years old. She was, September of 1901, she died. And there were other tragedies in Hattie Brainerd's life that would go on. She had several children that died in childbirth and in infancy and so forth. Well, during that time period, even prior to Anne's death, they had actually moved from Buck Key. I think they lived on Buck Key for 6 years. And they moved over to Captiva. This is on the bay side of Captiva now, basically pretty much right down the road here somewhere, or maybe a little closer to the Green Flash. And they built this home. So it was Herbert Brainerd and Hattie Brainerd, and they built this home on Captiva. But yet, another tragedy. Herbert Brainerd passed away from a cold. He had a severe, lingering head cold. And again, now remember, no doctors on the island, no medical care, nothing. This was, pretty much a deserted, island, paradise, but again, very, very rustic. And he actually died as well in 1914. Well, it was about another year. Hattie then met a fellow by the name of Alvin Gore. And unfortunately, we only have pictures of them when they're older. It'd be nice to have them when they're younger, but they were both, and not unsurprisingly, into spiritualism. Most likely related to all the tragedy that Hattie had in her life. Well, she married Alvin Gore in 1915. They converted that home into a hotel. A hotel called, it was either called Hotel Gore or Gore Hotel or Hotel Camp Gore. And one of the reasons I think they put the camp in the name, I haven't had this verified, but back then, again, most of the people who came to Captiva at that time were sports fishermen. They came to fish for tarpon. And so a lot of the people, the few people that were on the islands, both Sanibel and Captiva, they would open up their homes typically as boarding homes. And they would welcome, usually only in the winter, not many people came here in the summer. They would welcome these visiting fishermen into their homes. Well, Hattie opened her home, started opening it to boarders, and then she and Alvin, again, it became a fully functional operating hotel. And one of the things about Hattie was that she was said to be a fabulous cook. She was said to be she could cook great meals, and everybody on the island really enjoyed her meals. Well, the other sort of amenity they had, this is the dock right outside their home, and this was where that mailboat that you see, I don't know if that's the Santiva or that's the Santiva mailboat, would come to their dock every day at noon. It would drop off mail, it would drop off passengers, you see them on the top of the boat there, it would drop off supplies. People would make a list and give this list to the boat captain. They would take it into Fort Myers, get the supplies, and bring it back the next day on the next mailboat. Well, so she had this operation going, and she became the postmaster of Captiva. She was the second postmaster. Some records indicate she was the first, but actually there was a guy who called himself the postmaster, and they didn't actually bring the mail onto land. He would go out and meet the boat that had the mail, and he would bring it back to the island. But Hattie was pretty much the first kind of official postmaster of Captiva Island. The place you see here, right in front of her house, they actually built this on. So this was the Gore Hotel and their existing home. They built this part on so that they would have a place for people to come, and they did every day at noon. This became sort of a community gathering spot for people to come and go pick up their mail, socialize with the other people, see who the visitors were coming in, see who was leaving the island, that kind of thing. And it became a real community gathering place. Well, Hattie died in 1945 at the age of 82. So she despite all the tragedy, she did live a pretty much a long life. And here's kind of the interesting thing. Now, for those of you who may not know, the cemetery is literally right on the other side of the parking lot here. This gravestone marker that you see there is right there. And not only did Hattie and her current husband, Alvin, they were buried, they were buried near Ann's grave marker. And then on both sides of her were both of her husbands, Herbert Brainerd, her first husband, and Alvin Gore, her second husband, plus their son Gordon, and there are other members of the Brainerd family at the correct time. So, and that evolved into the Captiva Historic Cemetery. The other families came and they started using it as a cemetery, correct? Okay. So I guess, one of the reasons we kind of wanted to highlight Hattie is because she and Alvin Gore, and even her husband Herbert to a lesser extent, her first husband, they were the ones that kind of created that Captiva that became the Captiva that people saw literally from all over the world. So now we're going to talk about Alice O'Brien. Okay, like I said earlier, Tom Libanati and I and other board members, we've been talking about this thing. We got to find out more about Alice O'Brien. I think Tom said tonight we had 7 pictures related to Alice, and 3 of them were in costume. You didn't even see her, and yet her impact, particularly on the societal life of Captiva in the mid 20th century, the 1940s, 50s, and early 60s. She died in 62. So a little bit late in the late 30s, then 40s and 50s, she was definitely very, very prominent here. So that's the one we've been talking about and we wanted to get more information on. Well, that happened. This is another picture of Alice on her boat dock on Captiva. And by the way, we've got the Tales of Old Captiva and the book Alice in France, which I just found out about a week or so ago and got a copy of. And this is about Alice O'Brien's time in France, and it's the World War I letters of Alice M. O'Brien, and it's edited by Nancy O'Brien Wagner. And I was just thinking, man, wouldn't it be great to meet the author of a book about Alice O'Brien? Wouldn't you guys like to meet the author of a book about Alice O'Brien? Ladies and gentlemen, Nancy O'Brien Wagner is right here in the room with us tonight. Her two daughters, Franny and Zoe, are with us. Can you believe that? And her husband Dave. And you don't know how grateful we are for the, I over the years, as both a TV journalist and as a documentarian and other things, I've sent out hundreds of emails saying, we're interested in finding out more about this person, and we'd like to get some photos and that kind of thing. And I told her when she responded to me, yes, we want to help. She'll provide the photos that she used in the book about her World War I career, which was truly adventuresome and exciting. And she went back into the box of letters and documents that she had in her closet, and she pulled out some new stuff about Captiva from Alice O'Brien, and people like Alice O'Brien and Harold Bixby, whom you've heard about, and Dean Darling, and her home here in Captiva, and provided those to the Captiva Island Historical Society. So again, Nancy, thank you so much. The response, amazing. And then she said, I said, yeah, well, I want to show them next Wednesday at an event we're having at the Captiva Civic Association. Well, you know what? Our kids are on spring break. We're going to be in Naples that week. Can we come? I said, yeah, you can come. Absolutely. Please come and be our guest. So they're here with us tonight. And so here's the deal. We've been talking about creating these little 5 and 6 and 7 and 10, whatever it takes, vignettes, video vignettes, as opposed to dwelling strictly on documentaries and so forth. So tonight, those of you in this room, you're going to see the world premiere, the very first of the video. We haven't given them a title yet. We don't know what they're going to be called, and this one may change later on, which is fine. But you're going to see the world premiere of the very first 5-minute video vignette tonight. And you are the very first people on Captiva to ever see the photos that Nancy has provided to us, and we're going to show them to you here in just a moment. And the way we were going to do this, and this is kind of something I had going even before I had the photos from Nancy, but we have, again, from that great book, True Tales of Old Captiva, Voices from the Past, not only are the transcripts of the interviews in that book, many of the recordings that they recorded in the 80s, this was it was published in 84, they did the interviews, the Captiva Library Board from 80 to 83. We have the actual recordings. And unfortunately, a lot of them, and I've dealt with this again as a documentary producer in the past, you get some of these older recordings and, they have the recorder over here and the person was sitting over there and you barely understand, what they're saying. But today, and then again, this is a pretty recent phenomenon too, with artificial intelligence software that's available today, it'll go in and clean up a lot of that background noise and that stuff. And I used it on a couple of these interviews tonight. This particular one, frankly, wasn't that bad. The audio recording was good, but one I'm going to show you later, I really had to use the AI software to get it to the point where it was truly legible. So, in the book, True Tales of Old Captiva, J.B. Ross, who's the lady that you see on the lower left of the screen, she was a friend of Alice O'Brien's. She was a history professor from Vassar College who somehow met up with Alice somewhere along her career. She actually came to Captiva because of Alice O'Brien, and they were very, very close friends. She did in the book what was called a tribute to Alice O'Brien, which again provided a lot of information. I'm going to play roughly a 4 or 5 minute excerpt from that interview. There's much more, but and the photos you're going to see, they don't necessarily come from the book. There are a few that are in the book. Well, most of them are the ones that Nancy provided to us separately from the book about her time on Captiva. So here's the world premiere.
I should like to speak in tribute to Alice O'Brien because she is the reason for my being here today in this house which is built of cypress, which came from her father's Cypress Holdings in Florida. He was a lumberman in St. Paul. She was born in the early 1890s and died en route to Captiva in 1962.
Oh.
As a young woman, she was a fine sports person. She was a traveler, even going so far as to take an African safari in order to photograph pygmies and the life.
And that wasn't being done much back then.
That was not done. She had a car when she was in her teens. She had a boat at an early time, and she had many skills as a navigator and as a driver. Her first adventure was in World War I, when in her early 20s she went to Europe first as a mechanic. She enlisted as a mechanic to service the trucks and so on in the Army.
Well, how did she Alice O'Brien, ever start to come to Captiva?
I'm not sure just exactly when it was, but it must have been in the 30s when she came down with several friends, including the Colemans, who later bought property next to her on Captiva on fishing trips. And she was a very skillful fisherman, and they would come down and hire boats at that time, and they stayed at the old fishing lodge down there near Timmy's Nook, which later burned.
And I've heard about that.
Yes, and they were there for several years, and then I think she decided she wanted to build a house. About that time, she acquired her first yacht. It was called the Wanigan, the name of the Indian name for the boat that she had been on with her father as they brought the logs down the river in Minnesota. Among her many contributions, I think, to Captiva was, first of all, the circle of friends that she gathered around her. I don't know how, I think she had known Ding Darling from the day she first came down fishing.
Yeah.
And then Harold Bixby, one of the two Bixby brothers who were early residents here. And Harold was one of the sponsors of Lindbergh's flight. They were a St. Louis family, and a small group of men, 4 or 5, sponsored Lindbergh and backed him financially. And by the way, Alice was in Paris at the time. I don't know whether she'd gone over especially or not. She loved Paris, spent a lot of time there. She was determined to see the landing. I don't know whether Harold was there or not. At any rate, when the news came, she drove out, and she was among those at the landing, and it must have been really a spectacular time.
Right.
Well, in addition to taking care of us, you might say physically and spiritually, Alice also provided many of the amenities of life on Captiva those early days. She helped, for example, when I say helped, I mean she financed in one way or another a little grocery store, which is the nucleus of the present grocery store. It was really just one large room, which Parker Mills ran for many years, and Alice arranged for him to have around the floor, in a kind of quadrilateral, a broad aisle with tables and chairs, and it served as a little restaurant. And there was a wonderful German woman here, splendid cook. I can't remember her name, but she was the cook, and you could go up there for lunch and have those wonderful soups. And you could also order dinners there. Sometimes we would have gala dinners.
And that is what is now the island store. That
is the island store. It's the nucleus of it. And she also helped a young man establish a small bakery. This, too, was on Palm Avenue originally.
Thank you again, Nancy, so much for helping us with that and getting us launched into now so many more things we want to do now. We know we can do them, so it's wonderful. And thanks to, if there's anybody representing here, the Captiva Library Board, for having a vision back in the 1980s to capture those interviews with people like J.B. Ross and other people on the island That's the history that now we can go back and share with people and do what we did here with Alice O'Brien. And again, we're going to do much more. That's not the end of Alice O'Brien. That's just the first segment that we've produced based on the new material that we have. And I just wanted to also tell you a little bit more about Alice. As you can see here in the Fort Myers News Press in the 40s and 50s, she was like a local celebrity. I mean, she was, when she came to town, it was news. They would, you know, she'd stop, I think, first at the yacht base in downtown Fort Myers, and she'd take her Wanigan 1, Wanigan 2, Wanigan 3, and she would, and there's like one article in here where they detailed every single inch of that yacht. They told you what kind of wood was in it, what the fabrication was, how long it was, the dimensions, and all that kind of stuff. It was big news when Alice O'Brien came to town. And the other thing I want to mention is that, you know, at the end of that J.B. Ross interview, she said, you know, she helped put a man into business, a baker in the island store. That was not the only thing. She was really, really involved. Again, she was a wealthy woman, but she used her wealth to help islanders here. She put many people into business. She helped people buy land, and she helped people put their businesses together and that kind of thing. And as you see the teen club organized for Sanibel Captiva, she was really involved in the local charities as well. She would donate, or she would create something. But frankly, the thing it seems like she loved to do the most was she loved to have parties. This is Alice O'Brien. And it was a canoe regatta off Captiva that 400 people, and I remember this is 1957, 400 people enjoyed, and it was for Hungarian relief. And it wasn't unusual for her to get in costume, and she was called the Commodore of the Fleet in this particular race. Okay, so that was Alice O'Brien. Captiva has partied to aid Red Cross. Again, she was active in helping raise money for the Red Cross. And the reason I like this article is this quote that came from it. Probably in the big party that they had, probably the largest group gathered around the numbers wheel where Miss Alice O'Brien accompanied the spinning with clever, rapid-fire chatter. She was assisted by Mr. Kent Curtis, somebody else we want to find out more about, who displayed hidden talents as a paddle passer-outer. Later, Miss O'Brien gracefully welcomed and thanked the guests for attending, and then officiated as the winners of the various games were rewarded with the prizes. She was the center of social life, truly, on Captiva Island in that time. And just so you know, it's hard to believe that's her. In both those pictures with the big mustache and the glasses, that's Alice O'Brien. And probably, again, it could have been a party in her backyard. It could have been the Colemans next door or whatever. But again, and most of the time, she was helping raise money for various local charities. And one of the things we did, some of the things that we had done even prior to doing this particular research is we went to the University of Virginia, and where the Special Collections Library has the letters and documents of Kent Curtis, because he's another guy that we want to do more work on. And so I found all these letters and so forth. There were a couple of interesting things. These are letters from Dean Darling to Kent Curtis. They were prolific letter writers. They wrote letters, like you see, sometimes they were handwritten, sometimes they were typed. You know, if they had an assistant, you could type them. One of the things I want to point out here is, you notice the letterhead right here says "On board the Wanigan 3." And then you see the artwork above it. That's undoubtedly, I don't know for sure, but that's undoubtedly Dean Darling's artwork. So either he gave her a picture or he created this stationery or whatever, and they went on many trips together, both Kent Curtis and Dean Darling. I don't know how many times the Bixbys were involved, but at least Kent Curtis and Dean Darling were very much a part of her traveling troupe, and they traveled to a lot of places. So they were on board the Wanigan 3 in this particular case. And here's the quote that I really love from this letter. The whole trip, let me get up here where I can read it. The whole trip was one of those rare treats which can only happen to friends of Al O'Brien. Wow. They called her Al. Every one of these letters you see when there's a reference to Alice O'Brien, they called her Al. That was how it worked for them. So now let's move on. You saw in the Alice O'Brien piece by J.B. Ross that she mentioned a German woman who was known to be a great cook who worked at the island store. Well, actually, Unfortunately for J.B. Ross, she wasn't a nurse, she was a Swedish woman. Her name was Signe Whiteman. And she did the cooking not only for the island store, and that was later into the 50s and 60s and so forth. Earlier than that, she worked in her own home and inn that she had created. And the thing I like about talking about Signe Whiteman here, especially after talking about Alice O'Brien, is she came from the polar opposite, socioeconomic circumstances. Alice O'Brien was a wealthy heiress. She was in Sweden in the 1920s, and apparently the economy of Sweden wasn't very good. She had some relatives here in the States that said, why don't you come over to the U.S.? Because at the time now, keep in mind, in the early to mid-20s, the economy here was booming. It was post-World War I. We had the land boom, especially in Florida. So they sent her over to the United States. And she came over here looking for a job. Well, we don't have exact details of what she did, but you know that Lisa mentioned John and Julia Dickey, and this is their home on Captiva. They just had their winter home here. They were from Bristol, Virginia. And again, he was a pharmacist out of Bristol, Virginia, pretty well-off guy. Well, what little bit of information we can find about Signe's early years is that one of the first jobs she got when she came to the States was working for John and Julia Dickey. And we also know that and it was domestic help. We don't know if it was cleaning or cooking or whatever. We know she was a great cook, so it could have been some or both. She also, as we understand it, did the same thing for Dean Darling and Penny Darling. And she did it not only here on Captiva, but she worked in their homes in Bristol, Virginia, and in the case of Dean Darling, in Des Moines, Iowa. Okay, so that's how she kind of got her start here. But she came to the island and she met up with a young man, James Whiteman. The Whiteman family here, pretty prominent on the island, but mostly in the trades, carpentry, electricians, fishing, that kind of thing. So Signe met James Whiteman and they got married. Somehow, and again, I don't know all the details yet, I'm hoping to uncover more of this later, but this particular building, which was right over here, near where the Mucky Duck is, that used to be the bathhouse of the Fisherman's Lodge that we showed you earlier, the one that was on the bayside. And now Fisherman's Lodge burned down in 44 or something like that. So we don't know when exactly the time period is here, but for some reason, James and Signe, after they were married, came into possession of the old beach house of the Fisherman's Lodge on the Gulf of Mexico. And they expanded it, they improved it, they added on to it, and it became what was known on the island as the Gulf View Inn. I think originally, if I remember the history correctly, is first they just started inviting people to their home to feed them. In other words, paid meals. People would come in from the island and get their meals there. And again, Signe had this great reputation, and she served this wonderful smorgasbord and so forth. But later on, they started taking in boarders, they started taking in visitors, and they created the Gulf View Inn. They even actually added a few cottages to sort of the compound. And again, we're pretty avid hotel innkeepers of that time. You see the 1940s automobiles there. And I want to take you back to this picture because this would go on to become the Mucky Duck. The Gulf View Inn is that building is the building that I just showed you earlier. It became the Mucky Duck. So we have that piece of history. Well, now let's get to the recording here. Again, Tales of Old Captiva. They interviewed Signe, but unfortunately, and you can even hear it sort of in the recording, they had problems. The technology wasn't good, and they were starting and stopping, and plus Signe had a pretty thick Swedish accent, not German, Swedish accent, and so they didn't transcribe it. Lisa, I don't know if you know more about that or not, but okay. Well, anyway, they tell you in the book that she was interviewed and that they couldn't transcribe it for whatever reasons they had. Well, the Captiva Island Historical Society had the original recording, and truly it would have been difficult without this because of AI sound software that we have available to us now. I was able to go and find a soundbite from Signe that we can listen to here tonight. You can hear her voice. This is the recording you're going to hear is Sidney Whiteman speaking in 1980 and 81. The reason I've got this picture on the right, Charles and Ann Morrow Lindbergh, they were visitors in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and beyond to Captiva as well. We're going to talk about Ann Morrow Lindbergh as one of our women of history a little bit later. But the reason I put the picture up here is because one of the questions that was asked, and the question that I was able to retrieve from the audio recordings, was, did you ever get a chance to serve the Lindberghs? You know, and I don't know again if this was when she was with Gulfview Inn or Island Store or whatever, but here's what we got.
Do you remember anything about any of the Lindbergh visits down?
Yes, I do. They did stay with us, but they used to come at you. And they were the nicest people you ever had to have. And he came into the kitchen one morning, and they had their two children with them, and he came into the kitchen to say good morning to me. Oh my, he was the nicest person. So I told the people, listen there, Big Bobby, I would like for you to do something. You know, the Lindberghs are coming for dinner tonight, and I would appreciate if you leave them alone, because I'm going to set them over here, I said, by themselves. And if you leave them alone and don't go up and talk to them and ask a lot of questions and make over them, I said, I would appreciate it. And they came and ate quite often. And as I said, he came into the kitchen and he was so polite and so nice, you know, and he talked Swedish too. So we had a little conversation that I don't think she understood, but that didn't make any difference.
I don't know about you, but I find that pretty cool. So let's now talk about, since Sidney provided us that wonderful segue, let's talk about Ann Morrow Lindbergh and her time here. You probably, I don't need to go into great detail, I hope, except for maybe Franny and Zoe. I don't know how much they learn in history today about the Lindberghs, but, Charles Lindbergh, of course, the famous 1927 flight, transatlantic solo flight, first one ever, America, Europe, New York to Paris. But his wife, after that flight, and of course he was so amazingly, famous at the time, and his wife, his young wife, who was the daughter of U.S. Ambassador Dwight Morrow, the U.S. Ambassador to Mexico, and also later a U.S. Senator. She got into flying with Charles. She flew with him in a lot of places. She became the first glider pilot, female glider pilot in the United States, first certified female glider pilot. And they traveled all over the world. I mean, South America, Africa, Europe, North America, so forth. And because they were doing two things. They were helping one of the airlines, I believe it might have been Pan Am, I'm not 100% sure. One of the airlines, they were actually trying to establish routes for the booming aviation industry of that time. And she would act as his navigator. So they had quite the career there. And then they would come and visit Captiva. And the reason this picture in the upper left, these are the people that brought Charles and Ann Morrow Lindbergh to Captiva. That is Ann Morrow Lindbergh in the center there in that left picture with Jim and Ellie Newton. Jim was a real estate developer born and raised on Fort Myers Beach. Ellie, he married later in life. Again, I told you, I think Charles Lindbergh was the best man at their wedding. And that's them in their 90s. This is 1995. And believe it or not, this is the opening of the Shell Museum on Santa Fe. She was here, I believe, because I did a lot, when I was in television news at the time, and we did a lot of stories with Jim and Ellie. And I believe this was Jim's 90th birthday. And when it was Jim's 90th birthday, they held a huge celebration in our convention center downtown. And Ann was there. She attended that. So you can see from this picture, they were lifelong friends once they met through the French surgeon Alexis Carrel earlier in life. And you can see here, by the way, the picture on the lower right is not Captiva. Unfortunately, I wish we had photos of them on Captiva, but we don't have many, if any. But this was them in the 10,000 Islands. Jim, when they would come down, Jim in particular, I don't know that Ellie went on many of these trips, and some of them I think were even before Jim and Ellie got married, but he would take them into the 10,000 Islands of the Everglades, and they would do sailing. And the big thing about Jim and Ellie and their relationship to Charles and Anne Laura Lindbergh was that Jim was voraciously protective of their privacy. One of the reasons he chose Captiva Island for them, they were looking for a Florida getaway, a Florida winter getaway. And one of the reasons that Jim chose Captiva for them was that he thought, because he had a lot of friends here on the islands, he lived on Fort Myers Beach, he thought that people here would respect their privacy. And he knew enough people to tell the people of Captiva, when the Lindberghs come, please, these people have been hammered. Everywhere they go, they're hounded by press. Their firstborn child was kidnapped and murdered, and they couldn't get away from the press. So Jim was hugely protective of their privacy. And there are stories even that, Jim and Ann would be walking down the beach of Captiva in the early days, and because everybody had been told, don't bother the Lindberghs, people would avert their eyes and walk off to the side. And Charles Lindbergh even mentioned it one time, well, why are these people avoiding us? But it was because everybody was, and the people on the island included, were very protective of them. In fact, there's a story, and Tom Livinati has related this to me, that at Tween Waters Inn, where Anne in particular, later in life, she would come by herself. She would be there and eating dinner. I don't think she ever stayed there. They stayed in cottages right around here. One night somebody came in and said, I want to go talk. I see the Lindberghs, I see Anne Lindbergh, I want to go talk to her. And Dottie Price. Was it Dottie or Grace? Grace Price, one of the original owners of Tween Waters Inn, says, okay, well, let me show you to the door. She wasn't going to let him anywhere near. Kicked him out of the restaurant. This book, Gift from the Sea, this is the 50th anniversary edition, but the original edition was published in 1955. It became a huge bestseller in the United States and has remained on bestseller lists ever since then. This particular edition you see was the 50th anniversary edition, which was a republish of that book. And it was based on a week that she spent by herself here in a cottage on Captiva Island. And there's all sorts of, prior to that, she and Charles both had some writings that were relatively controversial because of things that they had said during World War II and so forth. But for Anne, anyway, this particular book she became like this best-selling author again, and sort of became one of the nation's heroes again. So it really helped her in that quest. Well, here's what I'm going to play two brief excerpts. There's an audio book of this, which is wonderful. In the 2005 50th anniversary edition, Reed Lindbergh, her youngest daughter, wrote and reads an introduction in the audio book, and I want you to hear.
When my mother was writing the book, she stayed in a little cottage near the beach on Captiva Island on Florida's Gulf Coast. Many people have claimed to know which cottage it was and where it stands today, but the Florida friends who originally found the place for her told me years ago that the cottage had been gone even then for a long time. Knowing this to be true, I went to spend a week on Captiva recently, bringing with me the copy of Gift from the Sea that my mother had inscribed in 1955, quite simply, for Reeve. It was not the writer's cottage that I was looking for on the shores of the Gulf of Mexico, but the writer. At whatever point one opens Gift from the Sea, to any chapter or page, the author's words offer a chance to breathe and to live more slowly. The book makes it possible to quiet down and rest in the present, no matter what the circumstances may be. Even the sway and flow of language and cadence seem to me to make reference to the easy, inevitable movements of the sea. I don't know whether my mother wrote this way consciously or whether it came as a natural result of living on the beach day after day while writing the book. Whatever the reason, after just a few pages, I always begin to relax into that movement and to feel like something that belongs to the tide.
Claudette Colbert, the very famous early, mid-20th century actress, she actually narrated the audiobook when it was first released in 1955. I mean, whenever they put out an audiobook after that. And so the words that you're going to hear now are the actual words written by Anne Morrow Lindbergh and read by Claudette Colbert. And again, I want you to kind of feel and understand the impact that being here on Captiva Island had on Anne Morrow Lindbergh.
I am packing to leave my island. What have I for my efforts, for my ruminations on the beach? What answers or solutions have I found for my life? I have a few shells in my pocket, a few clues, only a few. When I think back to my first days here, I realize how greedily I collected. My pockets bulged with wet shells, the damp sand clinging to their crevices. The beach was covered with beautiful shells, and I could not let one go by unnoticed. I couldn't even walk head up looking out to sea, for fear of missing something precious at my feet. The collector walks with blinders on. He sees nothing but the prize. In fact, the acquisitive instinct is incompatible with true appreciation of beauty. But after all the pockets were stretched and damp, and the bookcase shelves filled and the window ledges covered, I began to drop my acquisitiveness. I began to discard from my possessions, to select. One cannot collect all the beautiful shells on the beach. One can collect only a few, and they are more beautiful if they are few. A few shells. Island living has been a lens through which to examine my own life in the North. I must keep my lens when I go back. Little by little, one's holiday vision tends to fade. I must remember to see with island eyes. The shells will remind me. They must be my island eyes.
I think you could hear there the rhythm of the tides and things that Reed was talking about in her introduction to the book. So that's what we have on Anne Morrow Lindbergh, and this kind of takes me into the fact that Anne Morrow Lindbergh, famous people have been here, but we've also had some famous and not so famous artists, authors, and musicians that have found their muse on Captiva Island. And so we want to introduce you now to one of those particular artists that really spent, she wasn't just a winter visitor here, she was pretty much from her 30s a lifelong resident, Maybelle Stamper. And the piece you're going to see here is actually from one of the early documentaries called Artists and Authors, and here's what he produced on Maybelle Stamper.
Born in 1907, Maybelle Richardson Stamper was committed to becoming an artist by her teen years. She studied initially in her hometown of Dublin, New Hampshire. By the early 1940s, Stamper had achieved considerable success as an artist and teacher. She exhibited at several New York galleries. In 1947, Stamper moved to then little-known Captiva Island. She gave up her academics to pursue the personal and artistic journey that would occupy the rest of her life.
Her little house, which had been given to her by a friend, and that was right opposite our driveway. That's how it was so easy for me to walk over to her house barefoot.
After first arriving on Captiva, Maybelle collected and sold seashells, and eventually sold her songs to supplement her monetary needs.
Well, I knew who Maybelle was. She was a little strange, I'll admit. You'd see her on the road and she'd just dodge into the bushes. Larry Weeks came to me one day and said, Maybelle Stamper would like to paint your picture. Would you agree? I said, well, yeah, I guess so. So this went on for several weeks. There had to be negotiations. I sat every winter for 2 years. She said she was painting it in the way of the old masters. It's probably dusty. I had a mouth then. I've lost my mouth. I have no lips. I guess it's when I had hair. She finished it in 52. Yes, she did a good job.
In Florida, she continued to work, usually in watercolor and lithography, pulling her own prints on the press that dominated her small beach house. Those prints and paintings are filled with introspective images with diary-like inscriptions. She called them her songs.
I would describe her artwork as very detailed. I mean, for a painting to take 10 years, there's a lot of pondering that goes on in those 10 years.
She started laughing and I said, "What's funny, Maybelle?" She said, "You're wonderful. You just sit like a shell." I think while you're away, I'll paint a shell. So she did a Genonia. More people are knowing about Maybelle.
Maybelle continued working on Captiva Island, becoming more reclusive as the island became more developed.
Maybelle was very serious into organics. Oh, and she sprouted her own seeds.
She ate nothing but weeds. Finally, after 4 or 5 dinners, Maybelle said to me one day, "Sarita, I just don't eat meat. I'm not going to come to any more dinner parties."
She could literally go out into the woods and gather enough greens for an entire meal. Maybelle had written on the walls in a number of places, and so this is where she had written "Songs Out of the Sea," which Maybelle called her artwork her songs.
Living a frugal and hermit-like existence on Captiva, Stamper continued working through the 70s and 80s, but sold her work only when she needed to buy life's necessities. Her focus was her songs.
This is the catalog from the show that Jay Williams put together after Maybelle passed away, when Marie had all the artwork. So the first venue of the show was at the McKissick Museum in University of South Carolina.
How or why Maybelle moved to Captiva remains a mystery, but it was here that she reclaimed her freedom, her happiness, and her inspiration.
She was a searcher for a retreat. That's what she found on Captiva.
After more than 50 years living on Captiva Island, Maybelle Stamper died in April 1995, leaving a legacy of hundreds of not only powerful, but thought-provoking images. Maybelle Stamper was ultimately an original, for the rhythm of the surf and the sound of the wind still echo the songs of Maybelle Stamper.
Maybelle Stamper, how about that? So we are celebrating Women's History Month. We cannot get away without celebrating the life of this woman who unfortunately left us in 2014, Stella Farwell. Numerous contributions to Captiva, the art scene, but also to the Historical Society here. She was a well-known Captivan artist who worked in a variety of materials like you see here, handmade paper, acrylic, metal, stone, and she always tried to strive for some kind of movement and emotion in her pieces, and she combined these dynamic shapes and vibrant colors. So you can see these 2 pieces of art when you go back outside tonight. She would do things like, she got into a thing where she wanted to raise money for various charities, so she started painting patriotic emblems on fire trucks and cars, and whoever would let them paint their vehicle. And she raised a lot of money. She helped raise awareness of ovarian cancer while she was here on the island. Lisa mentioned this to you. She was essentially the founder of the Captiva History Project, which then took us into the fact that we started creating these DVDs and these documentaries. So we owe a real big debt of gratitude to Stella Farwell, and we just wanted to recognize her. As I said, she passed away in 2014, and we just want to thank her once again for the very important role that she played in Captiva. And we're celebrating the women of history.